how do we craft our messaging so that we're marrying that internationalism and that localism, which, to us are two sides of the same coin, and develop that into a message that is appealing for different areas.
Hello and welcome to the Lib Dem Podcast. This is a reaction podcast to the wonderful John Curtice episode that we had earlier on this week. This is also exclusively for Patreon this week. We are going to let you guys, because you guys have helped the show out and donate every month towards keeping us going, you get this before everybody else. So thank you so much for doing that. We have the host of the John Curtice episode, David, who has had severe plaudits and Oscars and everything else for his incredible performance, so he's never doing it again. But welcome, David.
Thank you, John. I mean, it's been a lovely response, and I do appreciate everybody's kind feedback. It's very much appreciated.
And joining us as well were two people who are also in that thing. Is Laura Gordon and Simon Lepori. How you doing, Laura and Simon?
Yeah, good. Glad to be back, and I think the response has been really interesting, so I'm looking forward to talking it through.
Yeah, the same with me. I think it's been interesting the past few days. More people have been asking me about the podcast in general, but in particular that evening with John Curtice, and it's been really interesting to hear those opinions from other people.
Laura's just turned off her camera because you could hear there she's doing motherly duties as well. She's back. Great stuff. Because to kind of show the kind of response, we had a 5,000% increase in the response to this thing, and most of it was about, is John Curtice right? Should we be unapologetically, we've got nothing to lose, pro-EU? Some people who obviously were very much of that side, it's probably reinforced that view. But David, as host, what were your impressions? Was he right? Are Lib Dems missing a trick?
Well, I think he raised a number of increasingly important points that I think the party needs to seriously consider and have an honest discussion with itself about how it really moves forward. I mean, look, I'll be fairly upfront. For anybody who doesn't know, the reasons why I ended up joining the Lib Dems in 2019 is because, well, a couple of things, but one of them was mainly the position on Europe of the Labour Party at the time. And that was one of the main factors why I came across to the Lib Dems. But kind of in some of the points that Alistair Carmichael raised in his response to John, about the response on the doorstep and people perhaps thinking we were being a bit extreme with the revoke. That was a view that I tended to take as well from my time out canvassing and talking to people. But I think John did raise some interesting points about, do we need to think more around sort of, if you will, short-term pain for long-term gain? Because I do think there is quite a demographic shift that's going to point towards a real effort for the Remain cause. But ultimately, I think where Laura and I would probably agree is that I don't think John actually said anything that isn't Lib Dem policy or anything that we don't actually effectively say. Perhaps it's just a case of we need to be better at getting that message across. And that's obviously something that needs to be talked about from how the party markets itself, how the leader gets that message across, and how we make sure the electorate know where we stand on it.
Laura?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. So, I mean, what I found really striking was that the policy that John was describing, I thought was actually a very strong description of what our policy actually is. We are a pro-European party. Our view is that the time to rejoin is not now, and that we would rule that out for a future for the next parliament, but that we do see our best future as being in Europe. And in the meantime, we would be advocating for stronger relationships with the EU. And that's exactly what our policy is. I think that it's a question of accent. So I think John was suggesting that our policy should be like rejoin brackets, but not now. Whereas I think the way we're presenting it has been don't rejoin now. But maybe brackets, but maybe later. And so whether we should be making that shift in emphasis or to, going to somewhere in between those two positions, I think is the question for discussion. I mean, and I think we haven't been very clear at presenting that to date. I remember about 6 months ago, Ed Davey went on, I think it was the Andrew Marr show, was asked if we were a rejoin party, and he said no, which is not really accurate. And I think that's fine. We're sort of several years out from a general election, but I think we do need to be clearer as a party on exactly what that message is and how we'll be presenting it. And I think that's where John had quite a useful and interesting point to make, and his analysis backed it up.
Hello, John from the Lib Dem Podcast here. We are delighted to say that this episode is sponsored by Pray to Reigns. Now more than ever, you need a professional-looking online presence and website. Pray to Reigns have been helping Liberal Democrat campaigns succeed for 18 years. Their Lib Dem Foci package combines a website, social media and email system to help Lib Dems win. You'll receive great support from real people, fair pricing and a huge range of features to choose from. Pray to Reigns are already the bespoke developers for Lighthouse, Lib Dem Draw Online and the LD Directory. They combine a talented system design with an unrivaled understanding of our party, our data and our systems. To find out more, check out the Pray to Reigns website at praytoreigns.co.uk/liberal-democrats. This podcast has been sponsored by the Katora Coffee Club, the UK's most environmentally friendly coffee club. There are over 400 independent roasters in the UK, each one crafting coffee in their own unique style. Katora Coffee Club works with some of the best to take you on a voyage of coffee discovery. The Katora Coffee Club delivers ethically sourced and independently roast coffee directly to your door. Each month you'll receive between 2 and 4 bags of coffee and their monthly extract magazine. Even better for Lib Dem podcast listeners, use the code BETTERCOFFEE to save 5% on subscriptions and gift boxes for a limited time only. All Katora Coffee Club boxes are carbon negative and offset the CO2. So why not do some good, enjoy some great coffee and check out the website www.katoracoffeeclub.com. Now, back to the podcast. I'm playing devil's advocate here, Simon, because that's my role as kind of the host. So we've had private comments. Loads of people comment on Twitter, and thank you so much to everyone who's commented on Twitter. We really appreciate the feedback. So I'll read you some of the opposing view we've had. So basically, John Curtice was predicting history, is what he was saying, and that as a party we have to be. We can either follow. We're getting stuck between following data and leading opinion. And I think that is something. And are we now at a point where I'm trying desperately not to put words into Laura's mouth, is that we can't just middle road it, because if we do it, we just please nobody. And that's what Labour, and he mentioned John Curtice, and I think that Labour's just pleasing nobody on the issue.
Well, I mean, the middle road is what affected Labour for 5 years. Since that referendum, Labour's not had a coherent, solid policy. We did, whether it was the right one or the wrong one, but we had a policy. I mean, I would always say to a lot of people, look, we're internationalists, we're pro-European, and you know what? I'm 40 years old. I hope in my lifetime that we do with rejoin after a referendum. And some people will be like, okay, I'm 70 years old, you're 40, I can see, next generation. Some people are like, but we voted to leave. And I went, well, that was technically the second referendum. If we have another one over the next 20, 30 years, that will be the third referendum, whether we stay out or go back in. That messaging thing that Laura was talking about is key. There are going to be people that, they were banging on about rejoin. We need to be a rejoin party. And I think we were all very raw from that general election. And not to rehash it, but I remember being told literally over those 6 weeks, we're explaining, so we're losing, because we had to explain our policy of revoke. And, any good salesperson will tell you, if you're trying to explain the product, you're not selling it. And that was, I think that's something that scarred us. And how do we deal with our Europe policy moving forward? We have to get over what was done in the past.
Go on, Laura.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think one of the things that we can look at is, I think, the SNP, where the sort of, and the different, and I think this is where the difference between revoke and a referendum come in. Like, the SNP are never going to win people who want to stay in the EU, but by winning a meaningful percentage of people who want to stay in the UK, but they have been able to win a sort of meaningful minority of people who want to stay in the UK, and that has been part of their electoral coalition, and that's part of their success. And I think, again, it's because people understand the difference between, a referendum and, I think if Nicola Sturgeon had come up and said, if I win a majority, I'll declare independence the next day, those people wouldn't have voted for them. So I think, I think John Curtice's point was that we're not going to win leavers. We need to make sure we're not rubbing it in people's face, which I think we did with the revoke policy. But actually, we aren't going to win those people, and so tailoring our message to those people doesn't make sense. It makes sense to target our message, tailor our message primarily for the people who are more open to voting for us, and that is former Remainers. So I think that was his point, and I do think I agree with it.
Okay, so here's the rub. So we're talking about, we have 11 MPs at the moment. We might get up to 30, 35, or 25 maybe, whatever our targeting strategy will be. That's okay for people in those areas. How? Because I get leavers voting for me locally. How do we get that balance right, David, of having a good air war campaign, getting those Remainer votes back, nothing to lose by getting them. We want them back. They currently don't have a home in politics, and not screwing over areas like mine, where we are Tory-facing Leave, not massively. Preston was what, 53, 47. So it isn't huge. But how do you do that?
I think that's the $1 million question, really, isn't it? It's a difficult mix, and I think as we kind of mentioned there about Labour's not really pleasing anybody by trying to sort of pitch itself to both parts, and really, as they always say, you stand in the middle of the road, you get run over. But I do think there is probably, I think, a realization that's coming down the line that people are now starting to see that perhaps this isn't everything we thought it was going to be, and it's throwing up a lot of issues. And I think what really struck me, though, was when I asked John the question about Northern Ireland, and his response was, well, a lot of people in England don't really care about Northern Ireland, so it's not really a big issue, which sort of, to me, was like warning sirens, because I'm thinking, well, that's, to me, this is a huge issue that we really need to be looking at and dealing with. But I think when you actually look at the vast majority of things that are happening across the country now, I've had a lot of people who have said to me simple things like delays on products coming into the UK because of, export times and increases in that. I think people are now starting to go, and they might have voted Leave, but going, oh, bloody Brexit, it's causing this. But it's a question of, I think we really need to highlight to people and do it quickly, where this is not something that the Conservatives can just shift on to the EU as the blame game, And I think we're seeing that they're trying to do that, because a lot of the time they're going, oh, it's the EU's commission that's the fault that we've got this Irish sea border, and it's the fault of these people. It's nothing to do with us. We're lovely and we want everything to be the way we think it should be. But I think if we're not very careful and we allow them to set that narrative, we're not going to have the ability to pull it back and say to people, well, look, actually, a lot of this has been caused by Brexit. We knew it wasn't going to be easy. It's going to throw up a lot of problems. Is it still something that you think you want to continue in the long term?
And that kind of goes back. Can you remember that it was polling done of Conservative Party members of what they would be willing to sacrifice to get Brexit? Scotland, yeah, don't care. Northern Ireland, yeah, don't care. Even their own party, catastrophically being split and destroyed to get Brexit done. I can't believe I used that line. But you're right. I don't know how we. I'm still not sure how we cross those two bridges, really, that we've got to get over. That someone like, someone explains to me, Simon, you've written focus leaflets. My next leaflet that I write, okay, how much pro-Lib Dem, that should be fairly obvious. There's quite a lot of pro-Lib Dem stuff in my focus leaflets. How much pro-EU stuff do we put in focus? Because I'll be brutally honest, I put bugger all national politics in mine, unless I can hyper-localize it in terms of things like, if there's an issue to do with caring or something, or school cuts in my area. So what would you say to people who have that conundrum?
You've just answered your own question. this isn't about, putting an EU flag on every leaflet and saying, look at the EU, they're so wonderful, we need to rejoin. This is about hyper localizing it to your ward. You will go across. I mean, we're across the north. I know I can walk down any street in Manchester and I can see an old EU flag logo on a funded by regional development. Yeah. So when something that used to get funded by that regional development fund is now not being funded, we can make a campaign out of it. And we don't necessarily need to say, oh, look, it's wonderful, more wonderful in the EU. It'll be a case of, well, the government said it would all be rosy and they'd fill the gap that was left by Europe. They're not funding this for you. So your journey times on public transport are longer, or your parks aren't being clean. You can.
But isn't that middling it again? Isn't that what we've just said? Actually, is the answer from, again, I'm playing devil's advocate, just saying bollocks to it. Let's just be proud. We believe we're pro-European.
I really do need to get. Sorry, Laura. I know you want to talk. I really need to get this point across, because people think being pro-European is banging the drum and going hyper-local on a European issue is middling the road. It's not, because you've got to understand, for 20, 30 years, the papers were going into everyone's houses every day, undermining Europe, not necessarily saying, look at Europe, it's awful, but undermining Europe with everything they said about immigration, about pollution caps and targets that we're adopting in this country, about the cost of things in this country compared to someplace else. About these weren't all overtly, look at Europe, it's so bad, they're causing this, but they drip fed that image of it is all Europe's fault. We never did that. And I mean, I've seen a load of old leaflets over the past week. We never advertised the good things, even drip fed them over the past 20 years. I mean, I saw something from 1994 in the back of a filing cabinet yesterday, and there wasn't a single mention of Europe. There wasn't a single mention of that regional development fund. There wasn't a single mention of costs coming down because free trade is cheaper. I mean, I would always talk about liberal values. If it matches a liberal value, you can put it into a leaflet and you can talk about it. So when David said, the cost of products is going to go up, we're going to have spikes in prices. We believe in free trade. We believe in fair trade. Talk about that, because it's not overtly, Europe, but it's about our values. And Europe actually matches our values on many of these things. And you can sow those seeds of there is that better world ahead of us. We just have to work for it, and we just have to want it.
So I disagree with you, Simon, actually. I mean, I think the answer to what we should be putting in our focus leaflets is exactly what whatever you want to put in your focus leaflets. Like, I think this is about the air war, and it's about, what we're communicating and what our policy position is as a party. But actually, I think voters understand the difference between a local election and a, parliamentary election, and they understand the difference between a parliamentary election and a referendum. And I think, Niall Hodson, who's a councillor in Sunderland, was making this point on Twitter. John Curtice said, what do we have to lose? And the answer is kind of 11 MPs and 2,500 councillors. But actually, I think Niall is someone who made a very good speech in the revoke debate, which we probably should listen to. So he's someone who, who's thinking I do respect on this a lot. But I think my challenge back to him is, those people weren't voting for us in Sunderland. They were winning seats in Sunderland when we were a Remain party. And that wasn't because they thought that we were a pro-Brexit party. It was because they knew that they disagreed with us on Brexit, but they trusted us to, as local councillors. So I think what we put in our focus leaflet is, whatever you think that, about your local area, is appropriate for the type of election that you're trying to win. So if you're trying to win a local election, I think it's entirely reasonable to focus that on local issues. And, that doesn't mean that you should start saying Brexit is great. That probably isn't a good idea. And people probably wouldn't believe it if they read it. But it does mean that, in your leaflet in Preston, you should probably focus on issues in Preston, which might be, if you're feeling ambitious, definitely do what Simon's suggesting and start putting in some stuff around Brexit. But I think, I think it's entirely reasonable to focus a local focus leaflet on local issues. And then, when we come to a parliamentary election, a lot of those people who vote for you locally didn't vote for you in the parliamentary election because they knew they didn't agree with you on those issues. And that's fair enough.
Can I just cut in here? I want to throw something to you, Laura, and anyone else can come out. So we all know Lib Dems get bugger all media coverage. The only messaging the average person will see in areas like mine or non-target constituencies will be what we put in our leaflets. Can you expect those people who never get any sort of positive message regarding EU or liberalism or whatever, other than what we do locally, potholes, whatever else, and, getting stuff sorted, to suddenly go from loving you for potholes to suddenly loving your liberalism to vote for you in a general election? Given that's the only thing they see from Lib Dems is the local stuff. I think David might want to come in actually on this.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick point because I think, and the example I'll use is my dad was a councillor for a number of years, for like 10 years. And this isn't going to go down very well. He won his seat from a Lib Dem, right? But the reason he won that seat is because of the work that he put into that ward and, going around and knocking doors on a Saturday and a Sunday for, 2 years before the election even came up. And just kind of what you mentioned before we started recording, John, about the hard work that you've put in for 2 years to get a crossing installed in your ward.
8 years.
8 years. 8 years. 8 years. Okay. It's not as impressive now, John, to be honest with you.
No, that's more impressive.
But I think people pick up on that. So when you do your local focus leaflet, your leaflet is focused on, this is how hard and determined I work for my ward. And it doesn't matter what you think of maybe my liberalism. This is about what I'm doing for you locally to deliver, but within the state of using my liberal values to deliver on those issues. And I think some people, now it's not all the electorate, but the majority of people, when they see somebody who works very, very hard and puts hours in, when it comes to a general election, if that person is then the candidate for the general election, they might tend to go, well, I know the work they've done for us locally, so I'm going to lend them my vote this time when it comes to a national election. And then you have a platform to obviously advocate your liberal values and ideas and how that informs your politics. But I think you are right. There's a difference really between what a local councillor and local leaflets tell people and what the national message is. But they obviously need to have a little bit of coordination.
I mean, I also think at the next election, a great result of the next election, if we won 35 seats, I'd be stoked with that at the next election. That would be
an MP.
More than tripling.
That's why, probably.
Yeah, obviously, that's definitely the only reason. But yeah, I mean, it would be more than tripling our current Hall of MPs. But that means that there will be, at least sort of 615 odd constituencies, which we aren't going to win. And maybe you say, okay, well, we also need to think about the kind of next 35, which is the kind of development seats and the sort of point that we need to keep building up, and that's entirely reasonable. But I think there are a lot of areas where we can and should be trying to win councillors, where we also have to accept that we aren't realistically going to be winning the parliamentary seat anytime soon, and that's fine. Yeah. And, ultimately what will get us to the point where we might be able to win some of those parliamentary seats is probably getting to the point where we are the third party again and get those 2 questions a week and get that kind of guaranteed profile and get a higher profile during general elections and so on. That will then put us in a position to kind of keep on climbing. But I think part of our mistake in the last election was trying to go a little bit too broad and not really focusing in on those seats where we had the highest chance of winning. And maybe we could have got kind of sort of 15 or 20 seats if we'd been a bit more focused, and that would have been a better result. I mean, I do think, you're right to raise the challenge, because I think one of the other points that John made was this one about the kind of decline in the kind of former, what you might call the Celtic fringe type area. So the sort of very rural seats, your Cornwall, your Wales, your Northern Scotland, where we've had a lot of these, we used to have a very, very strong base in some of those areas, and are struggling. And though a lot of those are sort of more leave voting areas, so the kind of prescription that he's offering of kind of going all in on the sort of more liberal issues is perhaps slightly at odds with the problems that he was raising. I think one of the other points he made, which has kind of been less discussed, I think, than the kind of headline Brexit question, was that I think one of the areas where we struggled was that kind of telling a coherent story with some of our other policies. So that, once people looked past Brexit, they were like, okay, well, what else is there? And we weren't as successful at communicating that. And so I think, for me, a lot of it has always been around localism and community, which is a very strong message in some of those areas that are kind of a bit further from the centre and which have always had to be a bit more self-reliant, and that kind of carries through in the kind of attitudes of people who live there. And of course, feel free to write in and tell me I'm wrong, because obviously I live in Campaign in Sheffield, which is not a rural area. But I think perhaps that's kind of where we need to be thinking about how do we craft our messaging so that we're marrying that internationalism and that localism, which to us are two sides of the same coin, and develop that into a message that is appealing for different areas, both in the areas that are kind of very trending very strongly Lib Dem, sort of remain wealthy areas in the southeast, and also in some of our traditional heartlands.
I completely agree with Laura on this. I think this is something that I think we both care about. I think those seats that that were for for 50, 60, some cases we've held and not held, and held again for over 100, 200 years. I think have they all gone, or can we ever win them back? And I think that's a big question that the party has to ask. I will, just to caveat back onto that Brexit, remember 48% of the country actually voted Remain. And so even in, when you're doing a local ward, you can still target the Remain voters without targeting them. And that should be your easy squeeze. If Labour's the third party in the ward, it should be like, look, we Remain, we want to rejoin. If you don't support us for anything else, then just support us so we can stop the Conservative from getting in. But that's all nuanced at local level. But in these rural seats, I think there is that big, I don't want to say divide. I think it's just like a schism with it, because some of these seats don't have the infrastructure that they used to have, because people have just peeled away. And
as in
never
party infrastructure.
Party infrastructure.
Yeah.
These people peeled away and left during coalition, or not to be ageist, have got too old to want to do anything. So you look at your Berwicks and your Montgomeryshires and your Cornwall seats and your Scottish seats. They're vast areas. How do you get from one side to another? And I know David will be able to talk about this a little bit more. But yeah, I don't see. We've got the policy. How do we sell it to rural areas? And I think far too many of those rural seats had personalities rather than the party at the top of them.
Well, here's a question regarding to what, because we've talked about messaging and how we should target certain areas. One thing being bold on policy does is it attracts people to become active in your party. So whatever faults Jeremy Corbyn had, and he had lots, particularly he was very good at losing elections. What he did do is get people to join the Labour Party and get people active. And we've seen, I don't know if any of you have seen things like Foot Soldiers, read the book Foot Soldiers, which is all about party membership. It says party membership tends to, if you go for a big brash message, you will gain members, you will gain donations, you may not gain voters outside of that message. So What is that? What the Lib Dems need to do is actually we need to mix it up. Let's just be practical. So if we win the air war, or not win it, or at least become more active in the air war, saying, look, our policy is to rejoin. We are a rejoin party. That will get people to come into local parties. And so you then have the ground troops to start winning elections locally, get your councils, get an MP, however that stage goes. But is that part of the package? Because that's where we're falling down. We're not inspiring people to even get involved.
I think there's probably a wider point there, John, where so when I ran in Glasgow Kelvin at the Scottish Parliament elections, one of my best friends who lives and works in Glasgow, who's not party political, he's just one of my mates who I used to play football with, he said, I don't really know what the Lib Dems stand for and what liberalism is, but once I'd had the opportunity to explain to him and he'd seen some of the literature I was putting out, he said, well, there's not really anything I disagree with on there. And he said, so I'll probably vote for you this time. And then he was telling me that some of his mates in work were going to vote for me, and then I was getting bloody Snapchat things all the time from these people with my leaflets and stuff. But it was much appreciated, the support. And I think there needs to be a wider emphasis on, maybe educate's the wrong word, but trying to explain to people what liberalism, social democracy in the terms of the Liberal Democrats is, and how that sits within the British political structure. And I think there's an opportunity to use the big message of rejoin, but talk why that is informed by your liberal principles and what liberalism is, and why that makes you want to rejoin the European Union. And don't get me wrong, it's a difficult message to get across, but I think perhaps maybe more emphasis on our, we want to rejoin at some point policy would give us the opportunity on the airwaves to make that contribution and allow people to understand who we are and what we stand for.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, I think we also just need to be a bit bolder, perhaps, in sort of talking about some of our other liberal areas. And I think one of the things Paddy Ashdown did very well as our leader was in picking these kind of minority positions that he knew that the majority of people might disagree with, but that some people would feel very strongly in favor of. And actually, we don't need to be winning a majority of people. We need to be winning a sort of a minority of people who are ideally geographically concentrated, and hopefully not putting off too many of the kind of potential squeeze voters. And that was something Paddy did very well with, for example, the Hong Kong visas issue, and that Tim Farron was also quite good at on the refugee crisis when he was leader. And I do think immigration is another area where we would have the opportunity to kind of draw one of those dividing lines. It's, an area where Labour don't feel able to talk about, where the Conservatives are pursuing a kind of extremely right-wing policy that is absolutely antithetical to what we believe in. And where actually, the evidence is that the public is moving in our direction. The public is becoming more, or perhaps I should say less, rather than more positive, less negative on immigration. And also, especially on kind of specific groups of immigrants. So, for example, at the moment, it's very difficult to bring your partner to the UK if they're not British. And that's something where actually most British people are not, don't see that as appropriate. Most people think that if you're British, you should be able to move back to this country and bring your partner with you. And that's an incredibly liberal issue. You should be able to fall in love with whoever you want and marry them and live with them in your home country. And, to me, it echoes our, some of our finest moments, such as, the campaigns around same-sex marriage. It's about being free to love whoever you want. And that, I think, is an area where we also, potentially could be making some inroads, drawing some dividing lines and attracting people to our party. But also have to accept that it will put people off, and some people will find it extremely off-putting, and that is part of the package.
And is that what we've got?
I think it would be worth it.
Yeah, that's the thing. Boris Johnson, for all again, many faults of Boris Johnson, doesn't give a shit about people that don't care about him. And actually, he says, look, this is my core vote. There'll be loads of people that don't like it. I don't care, because I'll get that core vote. And actually, and that we're going to do a quick fire question now to finish us off, because I'm about to go off canvassing. So, okay, yes or no, Is Brexit going to be a big issue in the next general election? David?
Yes.
Simon?
Yes-ish.
Oh, God, such a Lib Dem response.
Sorry.
Laura?
I mean, hopefully, if it is, we'll do better, I think, than if it isn't. So yeah, let's be optimistic and say yes. But I think part of our challenge is that I think the Conservatives want it not to be. And if we can turn it into an ongoing question, not only Brexit itself, but their handling of Brexit, will be in a better position to do well. And actually, you know, I had some quite interesting conversations on the doorstep in Cheshire Malmesbury. Sorry, I know you said quickfire, and I've
I said yes or no as well. This is
but you know, I was talking to some people who, you know, said they'd voted leave, and I was like, well, whatever you think about leave or remain, you know, it's not reasonable to sign a trade deal on Christmas Eve and expect people to implement it by the 1st of January. And actually, the Conservatives' handling of Brexit is something that even a lot of leave voters, I think, would criticise. So I do think there's an opportunity there.
Okay.
So hopefully, yes.
Just before we go, because that links into something else that John Curtice actually said about linking our policies and with Brexit. So talking about healthcare and talking about, you know, foreign nurses, foreign nationals that have come to work in the NHS, now gone home, that will be an issue at the next general election, because the NHS now has 5 million people waiting on waiting lists because of COVID, and it's not going to clear quickly because it's understaffed. That's a consequence of Brexit and of this government's mismanagement of Brexit.
Completely agree.
Yeah.
Completely agree.
And also, Tim Martin can't get people to serve in pubs fast enough.
Yeah, Tim Martin is the owner of Wetherspoons for all our listeners. So the irony meter hit full whack in that one with Tim Martin. But okay, and final quick fire question. I'm going to go to Laura first and see how long she talks for. Is going to be, so we normally have about 5 key pledges on a general election. We'll rejoin in the near future, shall we say, be one of those 5 pledges?
No, I think. I think it would be trade deal.
Okay, fair enough. That's a good shout. You can say what you'd like, and then what you think will happen might be an easier.
Yeah. Well, what I would like would be to say, you know, something like reverse the most damaging effects of Brexit by negotiating a new trade deal with the EU, or something like that makes it clear that we're talking about Brexit, but that we don't want to rejoin tomorrow.
Simon?
I'm in agreement with Laura on that, but I think it will be that middle road of, we want you to decide. We're a rejoin party. We'll give you a referendum, but if we can't get that, then
yeah, that's interesting. See, the first one that's brought that up, actually, Simon. I personally, I wouldn't care if we never have a bloody referendum ever again. But
I think that's the only way we'd ever join, though. We couldn't just turn. The country would have to decide to go in.
I mean, does that mean, again, you've kind of got us down a right new avenue of debate here. So that would be, I would imagine, you wouldn't need a referendum to start doing closer economic ties.
Yeah.
But rejoining the EU would definitely need one. That's kind of where my head is at. And sorry, David, these 2 chatterboxes, honestly, mate, I am sorry. You're the one who should be getting all the praise for all the work you did in setting this up. So, David, final word to you.
No worries. I think it's just to kind of echo both of Simon and Laura's points. I think it's, in my opinion, it's a 2-step. I think it's got to be first, next election would be a closer relationship with Europe. And then it would be, once people are okay and feel comfortable with that, it would then be, you know, we are effectively then doing our second stage, which is rejoining the European Union. And I think it's interesting because you said there, John, you know, you never want another referendum. Unfortunately, I'm probably going to have to do 2. So I've got quite a few in the bag, I think. So it'll be good to see how that goes. And I've already done 3. So
yeah. Well, thank you so much, guys. I hope everyone listening has enjoyed this kind of reaction episode. Do let us know what your reaction to our reaction about your reaction to the reaction has been. we're falling right down the rabbit hole here. But no, we really appreciate you watching. Do follow David, Simon, and Laura on all their social media. Thank you so much to the guys. Thank you everyone who has subscribed to Patreon, including the new people that have signed up since the John Curtice one. I think it really shone a light to what we do here at the Lib Dem Podcast. If you are watching on Patreon, thank you very much. You were getting this before everyone else. If you are not on Patreon and you've caught it up, what do you think now the dust has settled? What are your answers? Are we being too cautious? Are we being too bold? You let us know, because we've loved hearing all your responses. So thank you so much for watching and listening. We'll be back with loads more episodes in the future. And in the meantime, go out there and keep canvassing and doing what you're doing.